If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, this is a story you won't want to miss. It's a reminder that true value isn't always found in a boardroom, but sometimes it's discovered in the quiet corners where no one else is looking. Stick around to see how one woman's integrity brought a billion-dollar corporation to its knees, only to build it back stronger than ever. Julian Thorne existed in a world of silent, polished surfaces. The glass of his penthouse overlooked a city that felt more like a map than a home. The mahogany of his desk was so pristine it seemed a crime to place a document upon it. Even the grief he carried for his father, the formidable founder of Thorne Industries who had passed away a year prior, felt sterile and contained. Julian had inherited the title of CEO, the colossal fortune, and the crushing weight of a company that was suddenly, inexplicably, bleeding money. A billion-dollar leak. That was the phrase their chief financial officer had used, his face pale. 500 of the world's top consultants, logistics experts, and data scientists had been deployed. They produced terabytes of data, thousands of pages of reports, and a collective bill that could fund a small nation. Their conclusion? A shrug. A complex, algorithm-driven, multi-million-dollar shrug. They couldn't find the source. Frustration had curdled into a cold, hard knot in Julian's stomach. He was failing. His father's legacy was dissolving like sugar in water, and he was powerless to stop it. One night, staring at a dizzyingly complex flowchart of their supply chain, a radical, desperate idea took root. The experts were looking from the top down. What if the answer could only be seen from the bottom up? He called his head of security, a man whose loyalty was absolute. The next day, Julian Thorne, billionaire CEO, vanished. In his place was Jay, a new hire for the night shift janitorial crew at the company's largest distribution center, the very heart of the billion-dollar hemorrhage. His new uniform, a simple gray jumpsuit, felt alien against his skin. It was a costume for a role he didn't know how to play, in a world he had only ever seen from a spreadsheet. His world was now one of concrete floors and the low hum of fluorescent lights. On that first night, he met Elena Ramirez. She was showing him the custodial routes, her voice soft but clear, her movements economical and precise. She had a quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from her, a stark contrast to the grime they were tasked with cleaning. Elena was a single mother. He'd gleaned that from the small, slightly faded photo of a young boy taped to the inside of her locker. She worked with a focused intensity, never wasting emotion. While she cleaned, she observed everything. Julian, trailing behind her like an awkward apprentice, noticed how her eyes would track the paths of the forklifts, how she'd pause to watch the automated sorting arms, a faint line of concentration on her brow. She wasn't just cleaning the floors, she was reading the building. The inciting moment came near the end of their shift. They were in a corridor near the loading docks when a man in a tailored suit, radiating an aura of self-importance, stormed toward them. Julian recognized him instantly. Marcus Vance, the VP of Operations, the very man whose disastrously complex logistics system was at the center of the investigation. Vance's face was a mask of fury. He stopped directly in front of Elena, jabbing a finger at a small puddle of water near a drinking fountain. "What is this? Are you blind?" he snarled, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Elena's back straightened. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just on my way to clean that up. The drain is leaking." "Excuses," Vance spat. "I'm tired of the incompetence on this floor. It's no wonder we're losing inventory hand over fist with people like you on the payroll. Do your job." The contempt in his voice was thick and ugly. He didn't just see a puddle, he saw her, a person he deemed worthless, and he wanted her to know it. Julian felt a surge of raw, unfamiliar anger. He had heard Vance speak in the boardroom, his language filled with corporate jargon and sycophantic praise. Here, in the dim light of the warehouse, was the real man, a petty tyrant who wielded his power like a club against those who couldn't fight back. Elena simply met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. Vance gave a disgusted snort and stormed off. Elena turned, retrieved a mop and bucket, and began to clean the spill. She didn't say a word, but Julian saw the subtle tightening of her jaw. In that moment, watching her quietly absorb such casual cruelty, Julian's mission changed. He wasn't just here to find a leak in the system. He was here to understand the heart of his company, and he had a feeling it was standing right in front of him, holding a mop. Over the next 2 weeks, Jay became Elena's shadow. He learned to operate the floor buffer, to mix cleaning solutions, to anticipate the rhythms of the warehouse. More importantly, he learned to listen. He saw firsthand the chaos Vance's system had created. Pallets were routed to the wrong zones, shipments were double scanned or not scanned at all, and frantic forklift drivers were constantly correcting errors that cascaded through the night. The experts had called it statistical noise. Julian now saw it was just pure, unadulterated mess. He also saw how Elena navigated it. She knew which corridors would be blocked and when. She knew which sorting machines were most likely to jam. She had created her own mental map of the warehouse's dysfunction. One night, while they were on their break sharing coffee from a thermos, Julian decided to probe. "It's crazy, isn't it?" he said, gesturing vaguely at the warehouse floor. "The way things move around here. Seems like half the time they're just making more work for themselves." Elena took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes distant. "It's not the people," she said quietly. "It's the path. The system tells a forklift to take a pallet from Zone A to Zone G. But to get there, it has to cross the main artery for Zone C, right when the sorters are at their peak. So it waits. Or it takes a detour through the packaging sector, which is against protocol, but it's the only way. Every detour, every wait. It creates a blind spot, a chance for something to get lost." Julian stared at her. She had just articulated the core problem with more clarity than a 100-page report from his consultants. "How do you know that?" Elena shrugged, a little self-conscious. "I walk these floors all night. I see the patterns. I see the drivers getting frustrated. I hear them talking." Later that week, Julian's investigation took a darker turn. While emptying trash cans in a little-used administrative office, he found shredded documents in a bin that was supposed to be for recycling only. Driven by a hunch, he carefully collected the strips of paper. Back in his temporary Spartan apartment, he spent hours painstakingly taping them together. What emerged was a fragment of a shipping manifest for high-value electronics, but the destination code was one he didn't recognize. It wasn't a Thorn facility or a known client. It was an address for a third-party holding company. When he secretly ran the company's name through a private database on his encrypted laptop, he found it was a shell corporation, a dead end. This wasn't just inefficiency. This wasn't just chaos creating loss. Someone was using the chaos as a cover. This was deliberate. A cold dread washed over him. The billion-dollar leak wasn't a leak at all. It was a heist, happening in slow motion, right under his nose. And the only person who seemed to have any real sense of the how was the woman who cleaned the floors. The late-night shifts began to forge an unlikely bond between them. Julian, stripped of his wealth and status, found himself speaking more freely than he had in years. He talked about the pressure of his old job, framing it as a demanding middle management position he'd burned out from. Elena, in turn, slowly began to open up about her life. She spoke of her son, Leo, a bright but quiet 8-year-old. "He's a good boy," she said one night, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Loves to build things, towers, robots. He has a better sense of engineering than half the guys out there." Her smile faded slightly. "He hasn't spoken much since his father passed away. The doctors say it's trauma, that he'll speak when he's ready." Julian's heart ached for her. He saw the exhaustion behind her resilient eyes, the deep love that fueled her through these long nights. He started doing little things to make her life easier. He'd accidentally make too much coffee and insist she take the rest. He'd take on the heavier, more strenuous tasks, claiming his back was feeling good. One evening, Elena nearly collapsed from exhaustion, her face pale and beaded with sweat. She'd been pulling a double shift to pay for a specialist appointment for Leo. Without a second thought, Julian guided her to a quiet break room, insisting she rest while he covered the remainder of her route. He worked with a feverish intensity, driven by a protective instinct he hadn't felt before. When he returned, he found her asleep in a chair, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. He gently took off his own jacket and draped it over her shoulders. He sat in the chair opposite, watching her, a profound sense of connection settling over him. This was real. The smell of industrial cleaner, the worn fabric of his jacket, the quiet breathing of this woman who carried the world on her shoulders. It was more real than any stock report or board meeting. When she woke up, she looked at the jacket, then at him, her eyes filled with a gratitude that was almost painful to see. "You didn't have to do that, Jay." "I know," he said softly. "I wanted to." In that quiet moment, a fragile trust was cemented. She saw him not as a clumsy new hire, but as a kind man. And he saw her not as a clue to his business problem, but as a person whose strength and integrity humbled him. He was beginning to realize that saving his company was no longer the most important thing. Saving her from being crushed by it was. A few nights later, emboldened by their growing friendship, Elena made a decision. She trusted Jay. He listened, he understood, and he didn't look at her with pity. After their shift, as the first hints of dawn touched the sky, she hesitated by her locker. "Jay, can I show you something?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, his curiosity piqued. She led him not to her car, but to a small, secluded alcove behind a bank of unused lockers. From her bag, she pulled out a worn, spiral-bound notebook. She opened it on a dusty crate. Julian looked down, and his breath caught in his throat. The pages were filled with incredibly detailed, hand-drawn maps of the warehouse. But these weren't just blueprints. They were annotated with arrows, notes, and timestamps, charting the chaotic, inefficient paths of goods she had described. It was a visual diary of the system's failure. "I started this about a year ago," she said, her finger tracing a red line that looped back on itself. "It looked wrong, wasteful. I tried to tell my shift supervisor, but he just laughed at me." Then she turned to a new page. It was a cleaner, more streamlined map, a proposed new layout. "This is how it should work," she explained, her voice gaining a quiet confidence. "If the bulk receiving from Zone A moves to this vacant section here, and the high-volume packing line is shifted closer to the shipping docks, it would eliminate 70% of the cross-traffic. It's simple physics. The shortest path." Julian was speechless. It was brilliant. Utterly, undeniably brilliant. It was a solution so practical and elegant that his 500 experts had completely missed it, buried as they were in data models, instead of reality. Then, Elena's expression grew heavy with memory. She turned to the back of the notebook. Tucked into a small pocket was a creased old photograph of a man in a Thorn Industries forklift operator's uniform. He had a wide, warm smile. "That's my husband, Miguel," she said softly. "He worked here for 10 years. 3 years ago, there was a huge inventory loss. High-value cargo, just like now. They investigated for weeks. And in the end, they blamed him. They said he was negligent, that he misscanned a whole shipment." Her voice cracked. "He swore he followed the protocols, that the system sent him on a wild goose chase and the pallet just vanished. But no one listened. They fired him. He lost his pension. He was so ashamed, so broken. He got sick not long after. His heart just gave out." She looked up at Julian, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I know he was telling the truth. I know this system is what killed him. That's why I started this. I have to prove he was right." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just about corporate greed anymore. It was about a man's life and a family's honor. Vance's system hadn't just cost the company money. It had cost a good man his reputation, and ultimately, his life. A cold, righteous fury settled deep in Julian's soul. He looked from the picture of the smiling man to Elena's determined, grief-stricken face. His billion-dollar problem now had a name: Miguel Ramirez. and he would move heaven and earth to get justice for him. Julian's undercover mission was officially over. His new mission was a covert operation. He was no longer just observing. He was building a case. "Elena," he said, his voice firm with a conviction that surprised even himself. "What you have here, this is more than just a theory. This is the truth, and we're going to prove it." For the first time, he saw a flicker of hope ignite in her eyes. "But how? I'm a janitor. You're Jay. Who will listen to us?" "They will listen to the evidence," he assured her, his mind already racing. "We just need to connect your notes to their numbers." That night, Julian went back to his real life. He summoned his trusted head of security, a man named Henderson, who had served his father for 30 years. In the sterile silence of his penthouse, Julian laid out the entire story: his undercover work, Vance's cruelty, Elena's notebook, the story of her husband. Henderson, a man of few words, listened without interruption, his expression grim. "What do you need, sir?" he asked when Julian had finished. "I need access," Julian said. "Undetectable, untraceable access to the live inventory and shipping database. I need to pull every manifest, every scan log, every driver report from the last 3 years." Henderson nodded. "And I need a ghost in the machine. I need to be able to run simulations based on new parameters without anyone on the IT staff knowing." "It will be done," Henderson said. For the next week, Julian lived a double life. By night, he was Jay, working his shift, talking with Elena, refining her maps, and understanding the nuances of the warehouse floor. They were a team, poring over her notebook during their breaks, her practical knowledge combining with his growing understanding of the corporate data streams. By day, he was a ghost, locked in his apartment, a bank of monitors displaying the company's most sensitive data. With Henderson's untraceable backdoor, Julian began to overlay Elena's hand-drawn maps onto the digital logistics data. The results were staggering. Her inefficient paths lined up perfectly with database records of delayed shipments and lost inventory. He ran a simulation using her proposed new layout. The model predicted an immediate 92% reduction in logistical errors and a near-total elimination of unscanned inventory events. It was the billion-dollar solution, right there in a janitor's notebook. He also started tracing the ghost shipments from the shredded manifest. He found more, dozens of them, all small, all high value, all routed through the same shell corporation. The money trail led to an offshore account, an anonymous one. But Julian's resources were vast. He hired a team of forensic accountants, the best in the world, telling them only that they were working on a private contract for Thorn Industries. He was no longer just proving Elena's husband was innocent. He was building an airtight case for grand larceny against the system's architect, Marcus Vance. He was going to burn him to the ground. The closer they got to the truth, the more reckless Vance became. He must have sensed a shift in the currents, perhaps an anonymous tip from a loyal sycophant that the new janitor was asking too many questions, or that Elena Ramirez seemed to be spending more time observing the loading docks than scrubbing floors. Vance's paranoia, fueled by his guilt, began to manifest as heightened cruelty. He started conducting surprise inspections during the night shift, his presence casting a pall of fear over the workers. He would publicly berate employees for the slightest infractions, creating a toxic atmosphere of intimidation. He seemed to take a special venomous interest in Elena. He would follow her on her route, trying to catch her in a mistake. He'd accidentally spill his coffee on a just-cleaned floor and watch with a smirk as she cleaned it up again. Julian, as Jay, had to physically restrain himself from intervening, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Elena endured it all with a stoic grace that only infuriated Vance more. She knew they were close. Julian had told her that her data was a perfect match, that the proof was undeniable. The annual shareholder meeting was in 3 days. Julian was planning to let Vance give his presentation, which would undoubtedly blame the warehouse workers and propose more automation, and then he would expose him. But Vance made his move first. On the night before the meeting, as Elena and Julian were finishing their shift, 2 stern-faced security guards approached them. They were accompanied by a smug-looking Marcus Vance. "Elena Ramirez," one of the guards said, his voice flat and official. "You need to come with us. We have a report of unauthorized access of company servers from your employee login." Elena's face went white. "What? That's impossible. I don't even know how to do that." "Oh, I think you do," Vance sneered, holding up a tablet. On the screen was a forged email, seemingly sent from Elena to a direct competitor, with an attachment labeled Thorn Logistics Weakness Analysis. "We found this in your sent folder. Looks like you were trying to sell company secrets. Industrial espionage is a serious crime." It was a blatant, desperate frame-up. Julian knew Vance must have had one of his IT cronies plant the email. Elena looked at Julian, her eyes wide with panic and betrayal. She thought her fight for justice had ended in her own destruction. "This is a lie," she pleaded. "I would never." "Tell it to the police," Vance said, waving a dismissive hand at the guards. "Take her, and clear out her locker. She's fired." The guards took Elena's arms. As they led her away, she looked back at Jay, her expression a heartbreaking mix of fear and confusion. Julian met her gaze, and in that split second, he tried to convey a message with his eyes. "Don't worry. I've got you." The plan is still in motion. But all he saw was her hope finally extinguishing. Vance had overplayed his hand. He thought he was squashing a bug. He had no idea he had just declared war on the king. The next morning, the main boardroom of Thorn Industries was filled to capacity. Board members, major shareholders, and senior executives sat around the colossal mahogany table, their faces grim. The billion-dollar leak was the only item on the agenda. Marcus Vance stood at the podium, oozing a confident, practiced charm. He was in his element. He clicked through a presentation filled with complex charts and impenetrable jargon, his narrative clear. The problem was not his flawless system, but the unreliable, untrustworthy, and frankly criminal element among the low-level workforce. "Through diligent investigation," Vance said, his voice resonating with false sincerity, "we have not only identified the source of these inefficiencies, but have also begun to root out the malicious actors responsible." He paused for dramatic effect. "Last night, we apprehended an employee in the act of selling our proprietary data to a competitor. A janitor, of all things. It just goes to show you how deep the rot goes." He nodded to the doors. "I've had her brought here today as a stark example of the problem we face." The boardroom doors opened. Elena Ramirez walked in, flanked by the same two security guards. She looked small and defeated in the massive room, her eyes cast downward. She was still wearing her work pants and a simple blouse, having been held in a security office all night. The board members murmured, shaking their heads with disapproval, completely buying Vance's narrative. Vance smirked, savoring his victory. "As you can see," he began, "we cannot trust—" He never finished the sentence. The service door at the side of the boardroom opened, and a man in a gray janitor's jumpsuit walked in. It was Jay. He walked past the stunned executives, his work boots silent on the plush carpet. Vance's face contorted in confusion and rage. "What is the meaning of this? Security! Get him out of here!" The guards started to move, but the man didn't stop. He walked directly to the head of the table, to the empty leather chair that had belonged to the late CEO, Julian Thorn's chair. He turned to face the room. He looked at the shocked faces of the board members, at the dawning horror on Marcus Vance's face, and finally at Elena, whose eyes were wide with utter disbelief. "Leave her alone," Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "She's with me." A collective gasp swept through the room. Arthur, Julian's old family butler, who often attended board meetings as a silent observer, allowed a small, knowing smile to touch his lips. He had been worried about Julian, but now he saw the fire of the old Thorn leadership rekindled in the young man's eyes, burning brighter than ever before. Julian looked directly at Vance. "Your presentation is very impressive, Marcus, but it's a work of fiction. Now, I'd like to introduce the woman who actually solved our billion-dollar problem." A stunned silence held the room captive. Julian walked over to Elena, gently dismissing the bewildered security guards with a wave of his hand. He led her to the front of the room, standing beside her as a protector and an ally. "This is Elena Ramirez," he announced, his voice clear and steady. "For the past several weeks, I have had the privilege of working alongside her on the night shift. And while our consultants and executives were analyzing spreadsheets, Mrs. Ramirez was analyzing reality." He picked up the remote for the projector and clicked it. The screen behind him, which had just displayed Vance's corporate propaganda, now showed a scanned image of a page from Elena's notebook, her elegant hand-drawn map of a better system. "This," Julian said, "is the solution. Not firing our workforce, but empowering them. Not more complex algorithms, but a more logical path. A solution born not from a desire for a bonus, but from a quest for justice." He turned to the board. Mrs. Ramirez's husband, Miguel, was a loyal Thorne employee for a decade. He was fired and disgraced, blamed for a failure of the very system Marcus Vance designed and implemented. A system that wasn't just flawed, but was designed to be flawed. He clicked the remote again. The screen now showed bank transfers, offshore account numbers, and a web of shell corporations. The forensic accountants had delivered. The leak wasn't a leak. It was theft. Marcus Vance created a chaotic system to provide cover for his own embezzlement scheme. He siphoned off over $90 million in high-value inventory over 3 years, routing it through untraceable channels and writing it off as acceptable loss, all while blaming hardworking people like Miguel Ramirez. Vance's face had turned a pasty, sickly gray. "This is insane. Lies. He's a janitor. You can't believe—" His voice trailed off as he looked into Julian's cold, hard eyes. The game was over. "You framed an innocent woman to cover your tracks," Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "You destroyed a good man's life for money. You are the rot, Marcus." On cue, Henderson, Julian's head of security, entered the room with 2 uniformed police officers. They walked directly to a frozen Marcus Vance. "Marcus Vance, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and industrial sabotage," one of the officers stated, cuffing his hands behind his back. As they led the disgraced executive away, he shot a look of pure hatred at Elena. But she didn't flinch. She stood tall, her dignity restored, her husband's name finally cleared. Julian addressed the silent, astounded board. Effective immediately, Elena Ramirez is appointed as the new vice president of logistical operations. Her first task will be to implement what will henceforth be known as the Ramirez method. Her department will have my full, unconditional support and a blank check to make it happen. He then looked at Elena, his expression softening. "Thank you," he said, for her and only her to hear. "You saved more than just the company." 6 months later, the Thorne Industries distribution center was unrecognizable. The air of chaos was gone, replaced by a quiet hum of purposeful activity. Forklifts moved along clearly marked, efficient paths. The automated systems worked in harmony with the human staff, not against them. Morale was at an all-time high. At the center of it all was Elena Ramirez. Dressed in a sharply tailored business suit, she moved through the facility with the same confident grace she'd had with a mop, but now her instructions were followed by managers and engineers. The Ramirez method was already being taught as a case study in business schools. The billion-dollar leak was sealed, and the company was posting record profits. Her son, Leo, was thriving. With the cloud over his father's name lifted, and with his mother no longer exhausted and stressed, he had found his voice again. He was a bright, chatty boy, and his latest passion was designing even better warehouse layouts on his tablet, which Elena would review with a proud smile. Julian Thorne was also a changed man. The sterile glass of his penthouse now felt like a cage, and he spent most of his time at the distribution center or working with Elena in her new sunlit office. He had dismantled the culture of fear and blame that Vance had fostered, replacing it with one of respect, integrity, and listening to the people on the ground. The arrogant, isolated CEO was gone, replaced by a leader who knew the names of his employees, who understood their challenges, and who valued their insights. One afternoon, he and Elena were walking the floor, reviewing the final phase of her redesign. She stopped and looked at him, a genuine, happy smile on her face. "You know," she said, "I still can't believe you wore that jumpsuit." Julian laughed, a real easy laugh. "It's the most important uniform I've ever worn. It taught me that the best view of a company isn't from the top floor, but from the ground floor." He reached out and took her hand, their fingers lacing together naturally. Their partnership had grown from a shared mission into a deep mutual respect, which had blossomed into love. They were a team, in business and in life. They had not only fixed a broken company, but they had also healed each other, finding connection and purpose in the most unexpected of places. The story of Julian and Elena serves as a powerful reminder that a person's worth is not defined by their job title or their uniform, but by their character and integrity. It shows that sometimes the most complex problems have the simplest solutions, if only we have the humility to look for them in the right places. What do you think is more valuable in a person, their experience on paper or their character in action? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more content that will inspire